Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Scott Dobroski in San Francisco, California. Scott heads up the communications team at Glassdoor and is one of Glassdoor's career trends analysts. This is actually Scott's second time on the podcast. Scott, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Angela, thanks for having me and having me back.
Yeah, well, Glassdoor recently conducted an LGBTQ workplace survey, which I was really excited to see. Today, I want to dive into some of the details that you found, but I think first it's worth noting, diversity and inclusion are really important topics to me. We cover them really often on the show. We've covered them from the angles of gender and race. We've never covered this angle, and I think it just shows that even when we care about being inclusive, we all have blind spots. So I'm really, really glad we're covering this. And my first question is, what inspired Glassdoor to do this survey?
Well, thank you for covering this. And I love that first question. So, at Glassdoor, we're now one of the world's largest job and recruiting sites. And unlike some other sites, remember, our mission in life at Glassdoor is to help people everywhere find a job and company they love. Not just find a job or just find a good employer. Truly, if we can, and we hope we can, it's to find a job and company you love. And so throughout the year, we will, as part of these efforts, we will put out data, trends, information related to jobs and recruiting in the labor market to help people of all backgrounds and locations and whatever is important to them think about work in different ways. And so one survey that we happened to put out right before Pride Month this year in 2019 was our LGBTQ workplace survey. Diversity and inclusion is super important to Glassdoor as well as an employer, but also on our platform. And so actually our product team continues to think about ways to surface other insights from employees that can help give even more transparency and information, not just on what it's really like to work at a company, but what it's really like to work at a company for certain groups, maybe for women, for LGBTQ workers, for people in different age brackets in life, maybe for working parents. And so anyways, we recently, as just one of our efforts, decided to isolate and look at the LGBTQ workforce and community. And so that is kind of the nexus of why we wanted to dive deep here.
Oh, that's great. I think everyone wants to find a company that's, inclusive and diverse. At least I hope so.
Yes, we hope so, right? And that's we'll talk about that too.
Right. Well, I know that the survey found that 47% of LGBTQ employees feel that being out at work could actually hurt their career. And, I was just kind of thinking through this. Help us to understand when someone is concerned about being discriminated against in this way, like when they're thinking through the process, what are the ways that their career could be impacted when they're being discriminated against?
Yeah, this was actually one of the most telling data points that we uncovered. And it made me truthfully sad a little bit that nearly half of LGBTQ employees believe being out at work could hurt their career. And so some examples of this, and that we defined it so we actually know, this could include losing a job if they're out at work. It could mean not getting a promotion if they're out at work. It possibly means not being selected for a project. And while these are moments in time, they have downward impacts. If you're not selected, say, for a certain project because you identify as LGBTQ, one, yes, you face discrimination, but two, that's also detrimental to the skill set you're hoping to build and to improve upon in your current employer. It has a ripple effect of downward impacts to maybe how you could be promoted, to the skills you maybe would not acquire on a certain project that could lead to other opportunities. And so that's the disappointing part about it. There's a survey point here. It's encouraging to hear that 57% of LGBTQ Americans now say they feel fully out at work. So that's about 6 in 10. That's great. There's still a long way to go. We won't be satisfied until 100% of people are fully out at work. But you also see a portion. That means a portion of those who say they're even though they're fully out at work, a portion of them believe that being out could hurt their career. And so those are the implications and examples.
Oh, that's really helpful. I mean, I have to wonder, I'm guessing that, I'm sure this survey was national. Did you look at it at all from like a regional level to see if there are certain parts of the country that maybe people are more comfortable to be out at work versus other parts of the country?
We did. So we did look at certain regions. It wasn't done by state or by city, which we know could be a next maybe iteration of this survey in subsequent years. But right now, we did look at regions very generally, like the West, the Pacific Northwest, the South, and the Northeast. At this time, there were no significant differences, but yes, there were a few percentage points difference, and maybe no surprise you found that more employees were fully out at work, or more employees felt that being fully out at work would not hurt their career in parts like the West and the Pacific and the Northeast.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think of, I remember there's a woman that I work with sometimes who is in San Francisco and works for a big tech company there. And we were at an event maybe 2 years ago, and she was talking about, she was just getting married, and she was talking about her wife. And I remember it like really struck me because I live in Memphis and I've never heard someone talk about their same-sex partner at work before. And I remember thinking, wow, this is like kind of amazing that she works at a place where it's like totally no big deal. And she just talks about it just like anyone would talk about their spouse. But it sort of caught me off guard because I realized in that moment that like, wow, I've never seen someone have that kind of freedom to express like who they actually are.
Yeah, I mean, that is the developing trend. And again, that is so encouraging to hear, but it's also, I wish it was that way everywhere. And, like I fully acknowledge I'm in San Francisco. I work for a tech company where they literally are saying we want diversity and inclusion. In fact, we're working really hard. We can't have enough diversity and inclusion. It's not just Glassdoor; it's a lot of the tech companies out here. But the majority of companies, when we look at labor statistics from the Bureau of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're looking at nationally reported metrics. We know that the majority of employers actually are small and medium employers throughout the United States. And we don't have specific data on this, but I'm very fortunate that in San Francisco, this is the natural conversation. Mm-hmm. In New York City, that's the natural conversation. In places like LA, parts of Seattle, that's the natural conversation. But I don't have data or evidence that shows that's the natural conversation in Nashville. I hope it is, but I don't know about parts of Alabama yet. I don't know about parts of Louisiana yet. But what we do know is some employers are saying those things in those states, but there's still some employers who are not there just yet in those states, and even in some parts of California too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your survey also found that more than half, it was 53%, I believe, of LGBTQ employees report that they have actually experienced or personally experienced or they've witnessed anti-LGBTQ comments at work by coworkers. And that's really hard to think about. But if we have witnessed something, or if we say we witness something in the future where we're witnessing these anti-LGBTQ comments, like what can we do to help the situation, like as we're sort of witnessing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about witnessing it, whether you're LGBTQ or not, or an ally, is such an interesting topic because I think this comes down to what you noted at the top of the podcast is sometimes unintentional bias and also blind spots. And so it's not a surprise that 53% of LGBTQ employees report they've experienced or witnessed this. In contrast, 30% of non-LGBTQ employees say they've witnessed or experienced anti-LGBTQ comments by coworkers. So a couple things are going on here. One, yes, you would assume that if you identify as LGBTQ, you might witness or experience this more. But what it also shows is that fewer people who are not LGBTQ may be reporting this or not experiencing this because one, maybe as they are witnessing it, they don't know they're witnessing it. So here's a perfect example, and one we hear actually from employees on Glassdoor sometimes. You can walk by something, or maybe even someone presenting a project, and you go, I don't know if that project is the right direction. That's so gay. Like, that's actually a really common response, but that's actually pretty offensive to LGBTQ workers. So that would qualify under this kind of witness of experience. But depending on who you are, you might see that as offensive, and then others may not. So kind of the message here is that be awareness to sensitivities and differences. And this is hard to do, right? This is not an overnight read a book, read a tip sheet, and boom, tomorrow you've got it in the workplace or even in your real life. And to go even wider, it's not just LGBTQ as well, right? It's any marginalized group. It could be women at work, people of a certain age, veteran status, disability status, and sometimes there's invisible disabilities, certain racial, ethnic groups. And so I think what someone can do in this situation is a couple things. One, if you witness this and you're aware that, that is not appropriate for the workplace, I think you have a couple options depending on the situation. So one, if it's done to someone that you know and you feel comfortable, it's a great thing to go, hey, I just heard that comment. I don't think that's okay in the workplace. I just wanted to let you know, period. And that's the thing that people have to understand. Sometimes it doesn't always warrant a big explanation or a why. It can be as short and simple and straightforward as, hey, I just heard you use that word. I just want to let you know I don't think that's okay in the workplace. It doesn't make me feel comfortable, period. And often, many HR experts will let you know that if you hear something in the workplace related to LGBTQ or anything, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's often enough. And so you can let the person know in the moment as it happens. But I also recognize that's not right for everyone. You can ask the person if he or she is okay based on what you heard. Also, you can also report it to your manager or to HR if you feel that it's warranted. So there's a few different options, and you really have to figure out what's best, where you work, and what you're comfortable with.
That makes total sense. And I think you're right about sometimes we see things and we don't even realize, or we don't understand how important it is. And you mentioned other groups, experience similar things. And I know as a woman at work, I certainly experienced lots of weird negative comments and things that were inappropriate. And I think there were times where maybe someone who was a man in the same room either thought that it was probably no big deal, or it didn't even cross their mind that it was a problem. And I kind of get that's what you're talking about with the blind spots, is it's like, if it's not on our radar, we may not even realize it's happening.
Totally. And so, what I really encourage employees to ask of their employers, or hopefully employers too, is to ask for diversity and inclusion training, sensitivity training, bias training. Kind of these words all capture the spirit of hopefully what would be addressed. But it's realizing that we all have, again, most times it's unintentional bias. Now, look, that there's sometimes where it's very deliberate, and that is never okay. But if you're not sure, it's likely falls under that bucket of unintentional bias and, again, blind spots. And so one way to just get a little bit better at this over time is education, information. And so by having required trainings, maybe by having internal speaker series, by having certain leaders come in and give talks, there's a variety of ways that different employers can educate their workforce to reduce this. And then, of course, if employees want it, this is what you go to your HR teams, go to your management, ask, I really feel that we need this. Here are the benefits of it. And actually, here are some risks if we don't do it. The truth is, when workplaces, and there's numerous third-party academic research studies behind this, we know when employers are more diverse, more inclusive, there's actually correlations to better productivity, better creativity, more innovation, and it also helps with recruiting and retention. So it's kind of like, those are things that every CEO and business leader wants. So if you explaining it isn't resonating, doesn't get them over the hill to accept this or to look at it, bring in that business value to them, because everyone wants a business that succeeds financially. And so that's what correlates to financial success, is having an amazing workforce that is innovating and doing better than your competitors.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I think the other thing, in addition to training, I don't know how this actually works, but I think one way to understand people who have differences from you, whether it's like, for example, with me, I have tons and tons of friends who've moved to the US from other countries. And when I was really young and we would just hang out all the time, we would talk about their experience and what it was like growing up wherever they came from. And I learned so much culturally about these different parts of the world. And I was so fortunate to have these friends that were willing to have those conversations. I think sometimes we may have friends who are different than us, but like we never broach these topics. And so I think there's some level of understanding that we don't always reach. But at the same time, as I say that, like, everyone doesn't always want to be a spokesperson for whatever their difference is. So
that is so true. Yeah.
I'm not really sure where the line is on that.
You know what? And again, I think the kind of uncomfortable, embarrassing chuckle around it, bringing some humor to it, is kind of okay. This is such a fascinating topic too, because you want to talk about it, you want to explore it, but you don't want to make anyone feel like they are the de facto poster child for what you are talking about. There's a woman at my work who is African American, a woman, and identifies as LGBTQ. So yes, we will chuckle every now and then that she really has some different perspective that everyone doesn't understand. And she goes, oh, Scott, people come to me and I've just kind of accepted it. But she understands why they do. And she does remind me, she goes, you know what? If they let me know their intention and that they are coming, acknowledging some blind spots, she goes, that's okay with me. But she also acknowledges, right? Like, people can come to her, but the people don't know the frequency at which other people are coming to her. So that's the struggle for her, because it can be a lot if 5 people come to her in one day. But if one person comes once every week or even once a month, that's not too bad. So I'm not sure that everyone can control that sort of thing. But you know what? I think the best way to safeguard around this is to come at it with good intentions and to lay out and be really transparent and say, hey, I want to let you know I'm coming to you because I have this report, or I need to speak to this audience. And I'm coming to you because I acknowledge I probably have some blind spots. There's probably some things I don't know. Look, I'm not quite sure how to bring this up with you, but I'm coming to you because I think you see the world differently than me in some ways, and I'm not fully sure. But I really value your feedback, and that's what I'm here for. Mm-hmm. I've literally done this to a couple employees who are ethnically different than me, and they both kind of actually laugh. They're like, Scott, I get it. It's fine. Tell me what you need. And so here I am kind of going on, but I rather make sure they fully understand, and they appreciated it though in the end because they knew my intentions. So again, not a one-size-fits-all model. I can't guarantee that works for everyone, but I think intention can go a long way to help explain why you might be seeking some feedback and guidance from someone.
Yeah, I totally agree. It makes me think, and I'll mention this and we'll move on, but it makes me think of, I do a lot of solo travel, like internationally.
Nice.
I remember a specific example where I was sitting at this bar. It was called the Garage Bar in Norway, which is like a place where there's some music that started there that was significant in Norway.
It sounds fun. I would like to go.
It was fun. I was sitting there by myself, and this guy came up and sat down next to me. and introduced himself. And the minute he heard my accent, he said, "Oh, you're American." And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "So let's talk about guns, politics, and religion. What's going on with your country?"
Oh man.
And I said, "I'm not here as a representative to like explain all of this to you today." But yeah, like if people don't talk about it, then your level of understanding never goes up.
Yeah, well, good for you, by the way. I give you kudos there for saying I'm not the spokesperson for America. You're probably thinking, I'm assuming, because I know you're probably sitting there thinking, I'm just glad to get away from all of this actually for maybe a week. I just want to enjoy a nice drink, relax. That just happened to me too. I know we're pivoting a little bit, digressing, but I was in Italy and I got a few of those same questions and I really tried to keep my answers minimal. And it was an assumption though. And I didn't care to talk about it too much.
Right. There's times where it's okay and other times where it's like you're not so open to it. But
Totally.
Well, so when we think about rights at work, sometimes I think there's probably a lot that we take for granted when we think about our rights. What are some of the rights in the workplace that we might be taking for granted if we're not LGBTQ?
Well, I think the biggest one is a current fact, and then this goes to rights. I mean, right now, still today, 26 states do not protect LGBTQ employees at work, and many of these employees believe coming out could hurt their career, as our survey pointed out. So, if we have more than 26 states, that's like half of states roughly are not protecting LGBTQ employees at work, meaning being fired from work. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably the biggest right. And I will acknowledge I'm not an expert and I don't know all the ins and outs of every single state law because they're all different. That's kind of the weird part about this. And I know there is some federal legislation that's pending and that has been proposed that's hoping to get at this and fix it. But that's probably the biggest one is that still some people can be fired because of who they love. And that doesn't feel right to us at Glassdoor. That doesn't feel right to, I know you, because you said you value diversity and inclusion, and I know you guys talk about it so much on your amazing podcast. But that's a big one. That's a big one because where we work and get paid, let's face it, that's our livelihood. Are we getting a raise? Are we getting a promotion? That it has a monetary value, yes, which can translate to how we live. Are we renting? Are we owning? Do we buy the gas station coffee or the Starbucks coffee? It's all these little things that kind of, that can impact your life. But those are some of the rights. And then there are certain by employer benefits that is not accessible to all employees at this time. So for instance, there's still a handful of employers who may have certain benefits and perks for married couples, but it may not be the same way for actually domestic partnerships. And what's interesting is that affects LGBTQ employees, but it also just may affect straight employees too who decide not to get married.
Right.
That's okay if you don't want to get married and you're straight, but guess what? Then they're missing out on benefits and perks too. So there's still some employers who are behind the curve and need to look at this, but really should be providing the same benefits and perks for all employees, period. And if there are ones that are, advantageous to partnerships or married couples, that's fine. That's great, but just make sure it meets all criteria of people who are partnered up or living together or whatever the situation is. Make sure you're being inclusive.
It sounds like, and one of the benefits, I'm not sure if you mentioned, one of the benefits I think is like health insurance, for example.
Yes.
And what a nightmare to not have health insurance.
Yeah, so that's such a disappointing one because it can affect you personally. It can affect your partner, right? We know it can affect actually someone's potentially in some states and some employers. Again, I'm not an expert and caught up on all the exact laws right now in all of the states, but it could affect someone who loves someone else to see them in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not granting the healthcare that you're not granting this level of access, that's a huge one that LGBTQ employees are missing out on in some areas. And then, we say LGBTQ, but especially the topic of transitioning at work. For transgendered employees has really been an interesting topic. And there's a number of employers who are starting to support their transgender workforce by helping with their transition operations and procedures. There's still some that have a level of a ways to get there. And that's an interesting one because it can be costly. But like I said, it can also be costly if you have some great quality talent and they decide to go somewhere else because you're not giving them the same level of access to healthcare.
That's a really good point. I actually recently, within the past few months, had a conversation with an HR person at a really well-known hotel company that is in the DC area.
Mm.
And she was telling me that they recently hired someone who's transitioning. And she was so excited because the company had stepped up to help pay for this person's procedures. And it sounded like they were going to give them time off and like they were trying to make it as comfortable and as normal as possible. And it sounded like it might have been the first time the company has done this. And they were just really proud that they were making this a priority. And I was like, wow, that's really great.
I mean, that's awesome to hear. And again, most companies, and like, I get why, but we hope they're proactive instead of reactive. But yeah, most companies don't think about this until they need to, right? Until they have that one employee who comes to them. This is such a great, encouraging example of it. Sounds like really, an employer who has really good intentions and trying to help, this individual with the transition. For kind of the transgender community, a few things we recommend when going somewhere to work or to check if this is a right employer have to do with how do they look at pronouns, right? How is this in their training? Is it in email signatures or Slack messages? So many companies are using Slack right now, and you can actually put your preferred pronoun on Slack. So these are some indicators of how they might think about their LGBTQ employees, and particularly the T part there, the transgender community. Seeing if they can really address immediate needs and could focus on them. So that sounds like a success story for this individual in DC. But one common question that comes up is, what about the bathroom game? So right, you should be thinking about maybe transitionary healthcare benefits, but also what about just day-to-day areas for certain employees? Do you still have men and women? Should we have all gender bathrooms in all employers? So that's actually kind of the level one question that I see the majority of employers starting to ask themselves, is the bathroom question as it relates to the transgender workforce.
That's really interesting. I'm sure that it's logistically a big question for companies as they're trying to figure it out.
I think it is. And I think what I see most of them doing right now is either going to all gender restrooms, or they'll have certain areas where it is, they may keep a portion of them men, women, but then other ones going to all gender. And so the answer here, yet again, is it's not a one size fits all approach. But you really want to strive to be inclusive how you think about these practices. I will say my personal opinion in representing, Glassdoor, I'm a fan of all gender restrooms. I understand everyone cannot just implement this tomorrow. There's a lot to think about. Employees, also how just things are set up. But if I could just have it anyway, I would say all gender restrooms. You use the restroom you want. You come out, you wash your hands in a communal space, and then you go. So you start to see some of the restaurants and bars do this, and it seems to work.
I tend to agree. I think it's important. The one thing I will say, so I went to college with almost all men. And my sophomore year, I lived in a dorm where I was the only woman on the whole floor. So I literally mean I went to college with almost all men. And we had one bathroom with one toilet and one shower.
Wow.
And it didn't, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it didn't have, the shower, for example, didn't have a lock. It was just like a curtain, and the door to the bathroom wasn't very secure. And it was, so I ended up moving off campus after the second year because I was like, I don't really feel comfortable And I didn't know the guys, and they were the kind of guys that were sort of ogling at women out the windows. And
I mean, especially in college, my gosh, we really make a lot of bad judgments and say, say
right.
a lot of weird things to
So
one another.
I'm in favor of the combined bathroom, but I think there has to be thought around it so that every single person feels safe in that space.
I completely agree. I mean, your experience is exactly what we're talking about here. Like, how can employers be inclusive, look at this topic, but also make sure everyone feels comfortable, and also no one is being set up for something else happening that could make someone feel uncomfortable. That is
Exactly.
the biggest challenge I see. I mean, it's such a hard answer. I feel encouraged when I see HR and recruiting teams and people management teams thinking really hard about this. That makes me feel good. That's why sometimes they don't have a solution tomorrow, even though we think or expect that they should.
Right.
So it's that fine line of taking enough time to be thoughtful, but also taking enough time to actually act or implement, or at least acknowledge, here's what we're deciding, and here's why.
Absolutely. Well, I know that the survey found that 70% of LGBTQ employees felt that they didn't want to work for a company that doesn't support LGBTQ employees. But in contrast, only 46% of Americans overall who are employed felt that it was important to work for a company that supports LGBTQ workers.
Yeah.
I'm curious, why is there such a, well, I think I know, but I mean, why is there such a big difference here?
Well, I'd love to hear what you know, but you're right. There's actually a significant gap here. So there's a 24 percentage point gap between the LGBTQ workforce and everyone else. And so, right, it's no surprise. It shouldn't be a big surprise that 7 in 10 LGBTQ employees would not apply to work at a company that doesn't support, who they are at work. And then we have about 46% of everyone else who only feel that way. So I think what it shows is a disconnect still about people who may not understand what really is at stake for the LGBTQ workforce when it comes to being their full selves at work. And I'll say one of the biggest things is the career opportunities. That is one reason. That is the biggest reason we know through economic research at Glassdoor that leads to long-term employee satisfaction. It's career opportunities at work. Number two, guess what? It's trust in senior leadership. And so for LGBTQ employees, if an employer doesn't support it, it's not a big surprise that 7 in 10 of them feel this way. But what's interesting is that 46% of everyone else, so I guess I'd have to speculate here a little bit and take away some other trends that we see. That does this mean that only about half of people in the US are allies or are okay with LGBTQ workers? I don't know, and I haven't seen that stat. It could exist elsewhere. I think it comes back to that idea of maybe blind spots and not fully understanding what someone else might be going through in the workplace, and so why this could be so important to a specific group. What did you think, Angela? I'm curious.
So I think it's two things. I would say blind spots is one. I think the other is sort of bandwidth. And so in terms of blind spots, just for example, I have a friend, so my undergrad is engineering, and I have a friend who's male that said to me, gosh, if only you had never switched to marketing, you would have never experienced sexism, because engineering is very fair towards women. And I was like, part of the reason I left engineering is because of sexism. And I started asking my female peers that are still in engineering, like, am I wrong? Was sexism not a thing? And they were like, no, you're totally right. So I think that's the blind spot, right? If it doesn't impact us, we don't see it. And then I also think there's like a bandwidth thing. Like, so as a comparison, years ago, my grandfather had diabetes. And it was a really big deal to me. And I joined the board of directors of the American Diabetes Association in Memphis. Well, that became really important to me. I wasn't going to be working on the Heart Association. I wasn't going to be working on, breast cancer. Like, it's the one thing that really impacts me or my family that I actually make space for. And I think sometimes we don't have time to really, we feel like we don't have time to think about so many different things. So it's like we tend to focus on what impacts us or what impacts the people that are close to us. That would be my thought about it.
I think based on also data and trends that I've seen in the workplace, I think you're spot on. That is likely a huge factor in seeing that. And it's interesting. Again, latest estimates I've seen different estimates that maybe 10% of Americans identify as LGBTQ. Then I recently saw a stat that said 20% of millennials identify as LGBTQ. But either way, whether it's 10, 20, or somewhere in between, that's still more than half. Less than the 46% of straight Americans who wouldn't work at some place that doesn't accept LGBTQ employees. So I think you're totally right there. If it doesn't affect you, you might not think of it that way. And the bandwidth issue, there's maybe other areas you're thinking first, which I fully understand. The question, though, is that right?
Right. Agreed. Is that right? And shouldn't everyone be treated fairly at work, period?
Yeah. And I mean, this is a tough issue too, right? Because then I'm like, let's give ourselves some compassion too, because as we said, LGBTQ is one group, but at Glassdoor, we also advocate for all areas of diversity and inclusion, right? There's so many other groups that are marginalized, and we actually, this survey was really interesting. We have plans to do this with some other groups that are marginalized coming up to see how they're affected in the workplace.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm curious, if we feel like we're being discriminated at work, should we go to HR for help, and what should we keep in mind?
Oh, well, it all depends on where you work, and your relationship with HR. So I know HR can often see or seem like the safe place and a good place to go. I'd like to think, and I do think actually at the majority of employers, it is the right place to go. But there's a couple options as well based on who you work for. So keep that in mind, right? If it comes to LGBTQ, but let's say your company is taking a stance that is not in favor of furthering LGBTQ rights, whether in the workforce or out in society, and then you go to HR, darn it, that may not be the best solution for you, because if the company, the company doesn't have those values, HR, I'm not sure 100% would have the best answer here. So HR is a great place to go. They're highly skilled with this sort of thing. But when you're just not sure, this is why it's really important too, if you're LGBTQ, to hopefully develop allies at work and a community at work of having a safe place of others to go. You could go to them first. Let them know and ask for their feedback again. Like, feedback is such a gift. Like, ask for their feedback. Should you just tell them? Should you tell your direct manager? Should you tell at HR, even though the company may feel one way or the other? Or there's some outside groups sometimes also that you could go to. Maybe the ACLU or Out and Equal are just some of the really bigger kind of national organizations.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Those are very good suggestions. Well, I'm curious, if we want to help promote LGBTQ equality, what can we do as supporters?
Wow. Well, I love that question, because there's so much we can all do, but I know we have only limited time on this one. So first of all, as allies, as supporters, I think it's really important to treat your LGBTQ employees just as you would anyone else, period. So if they have a photo of someone they love on their desk, just like someone else, say, hey, you look really happy in that photo. Where was that taken? Right? You're not necessarily asking them if they're gay, but you're interested in their life. And if they put it on their desk, that's a coming out sign. So that's one example, acknowledging their life if they put indicators like that. Another one is, if you're able to form an LGBTQ plus or ally employee resource group at work, that is an amazing place to start. And sometimes it can only take one or two people. If you don't have other people like-minded at your company, but your company's open to it, you could start a group in the community where maybe 5 or 10 employers, representatives, and people who want to be a part of this effort come together. So it doesn't have to be your single employer. I love the fact when every Pride Month, we see a lot of employers put kind of rainbow images on their social media channels, and many of them walk in parades and around the nation. I love that, but ... The but is I want to make sure, I hope for more that they're also promoting that support internally. And guess how you do it? That is with your procedures and your policies, period. So if you put rainbow flags on your social media icons, but you still have policies that are discriminative, that's a yikes. That's not the right approach. So
Right.
love the social icons, but again, you want to make sure you're walking the talk, not just talking the talk. For really big employers, here's kind of a challenge, and I've talked about this again where I live in San Francisco and New York City, where there's a lot of very progressive large employers. I love seeing them march in their San Francisco and New York City parades, but I also challenge the employers who have the dollars and the resources to do this. Go outside of your big cities as well and go march in parades where it may matter more when it comes to awareness.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's right. A lot of them are billion-dollar companies. I'm really talking about the big guys who are really but they're the ones who are most progressive and often the first who go forward with different employee practices and benefits and perks. I love in San Francisco. I love seeing the employers. Don't be fooled. Sometimes there are also kind of brand awareness reasons behind this. I do think they are inclusive at their heart, but I just challenge sometimes. Let's see some of these corporate dollars put into areas where the education and awareness is not 100% welcome. And I think that's a great way to move the cause forward too.
Oh, those are great tips. Well, my last question is National Coming Out Day, I know is coming up in October. If we haven't heard about this holiday, what is this holiday and why is it important?
Oh man, I mean, such an important day, but this really is a day that just marks people feeling that they are able to come out, acknowledge who they are, and say, yep, I'm gay. And that's what it is. Be who you are, and it's okay.
That's excellent. And what day is it in October? Is it a certain day?
It is, oh boy, gosh, see, you got me. I'd have to look that up right now.
That's all right.
But
tell me the survey, where can we go to learn more about you and your work? And where can we go to learn about the survey?
Well, by the way, National Coming Out Day this year, 2019, is Friday, October 11th. So put it on your calendar. We'll be doing some efforts at Glassdoor around it to raise awareness. But we have a lot of data that we didn't even talk about on this survey. We also have free employer guides or free guides for employers and job seekers. So if you're in an area where being gay or being a part of the LGBTQ movement and community is not okay, I hope you'll look at these free guides. Glassdoor, we're not getting anything out of it. You're not giving us anything. They're simply free resources to better equip people to help them remember our mission, help them find jobs in companies they love. And so this is free content that's available. It's on Glassdoor.com. Those employer guides and this research also can be found on our blog, which is just Glassdoor.com/blog. If you forget all of this, I always say good old Google, it'll take you right there. Glassdoor LGBTQ guides, and you'll find the results right there too.
Oh, perfect. Well, Scott, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you, Angela. I really commend you and thank you for taking a look at this issue. It's important and we always enjoy joining you.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more subscribers we have, the easier it is for other people to find the show.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.